Today, we celebrate two brothers in faith, Peter and Paul, whom we honor as pillars of the Church and venerate as patrons of the diocese and city of Rome. The story of these two apostles has much to say to us as the community of the Lord's disciples as we make our pilgrim way in today's world. Upon reflection, I would like to emphasize two specific aspects of their faith. Firstly, ecclesial communion, and secondly, the vitality of faith. Firstly, ecclesial communion. Today's liturgy indeed reminds us how Peter and Paul were called to share a single fate, that of martyrdom, which united them definitively to Christ. In the first reading, we see Peter in prison, awaiting judgment. In the second reading, the Apostle Paul, also in chains, tells us in a kind of last will and testament that his blood is about to be poured out and offered to God. Peter and Paul were both ready to lay down their lives for the sake of the gospel. Yet this communion of the two apostles in the one confession of faith was the conclusion of a long journey on which each embraced the faith and lived out his apostolate in his own particular way. Their brotherhood in the Spirit did not erase their different backgrounds. Simon was a fisherman from Galilee, while Saul was highly educated and a member of the party of the Pharisees. Peter immediately left everything to follow the Lord, while Paul persecuted Christians before his life-changing encounter with the risen Christ. Peter preached mainly to the Jews, while Paul was driven to bring the good news to the Gentiles. As we know, the two were at odds over the proper way to deal with Gentile converts. So much so that Paul tells us, quote, "When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood self-condemned." That's from Galatians. At the Council of Jerusalem, the two apostles would once more debate the issue. Dear friends, the history of Peter and Paul shows us that the communion to which the Lord calls us is a unison of voices and personalities that does not eliminate anyone's freedom. Our patron saints followed different paths, had different ideas, and at times argued with one another with evangelical frankness. But this did not prevent them from living the Concordia Apostolorum, that is, a living communion in the Spirit, a fruitful harmony in diversity. As St. Augustine remarks, the feast of the two apostles is celebrated on one day. They too were one, for although they were martyred on different days, they were one. All of this invites us to reflect on the nature of ecclesial communion. Awakened by the inspiration of the Spirit, it unites differences and builds bridges of unity, thanks to the rich variety of charisms, gifts, and ministries. It is important that we learn to experience communion in this way, as unity within diversity, so that the various gifts, united into one confession of faith, may advance the preaching of the gospel. We are called to persevere along this path, following the example of Peter and Paul, since all of us need that kind of fraternity. The whole Church needs fraternity, which must be present in all of our relationships, whether between lay people and priests, priests and bishops, bishops and the Pope. Fraternity is also needed in pastoral care, ecumenical dialogue, and the friendly relations that the Church desires to maintain with the world. Let us make an effort then to turn our differences into a workshop of unity and communion, of fraternity and reconciliation, so that everyone in the Church, each with his or her personal history, may learn to walk side by side.
ci interpellano anche sulla vitalità.
Saints Peter and Paul also challenge us to think about the vitality of our faith. In our life as disciples, we can always risk falling into a rut, a routine, a tendency to follow the same old pastoral plans without experiencing interior renewal and a willingness to respond to new challenges. The two apostles, however, can inspire us by the example of their openness to change, to new events, encounters, and concrete situations in the life of their communities, and by their readiness also to consider new approaches to evangelization in response to the problems and difficulties raised by our brothers and sisters in the faith. At the heart of today's gospel lies the question that Jesus asked his disciples. Today he asks us that same question, challenging us to examine whether our faith life retains its energy and vitality, and whether the flame of our relationship with the Lord still burns bright. Who do you say that I am? Every day, at every moment in history, we must always take this question to heart. If we want to keep our identity as Christians from being reduced to a relic of the past, as Pope Francis often reminded us, it is important to move beyond a tired and stagnant faith. We need to ask ourselves, who is Jesus Christ for us today? What place does he occupy in our lives and in the life of the Church? How can we bear witness to this hope in our daily lives and proclaim it to those whom we meet? Brothers and sisters, the exercise of a discernment born from these questions can enable our faith and the faith of the Church to be constantly renewed and to find new paths and new approaches to preaching the gospel. This, together with communion, must be our greatest desire. Today, I would like to speak to the Church in Rome in particular, because it, above all, is called to be a sign of unity and communion. A church on fire with vibrant faith, a community of disciples who testify to the joy and consolation of the gospel wherever people find themselves. In the joy of the communion that the lives of Saints Peter and Paul invite us to cultivate, I greet my brother archbishops, who today receive the pallium. Dear brothers, this sign of the pastoral responsibility entrusted to you also expresses your communion with the Bishop of Rome, so that in the unity of the Catholic faith, each of you may build up that communion in your local churches. I would also like to greet the members of the Synod of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. I thank you for your presence here and for your pastoral zeal. May the Lord grant peace to your people. And with deep gratitude, I greet the delegation of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, sent here by my dear brother, His Holiness Bartholomew. Dear brothers and sisters, strengthened by the witness of the Holy Apostles Peter and Paul, let us walk together in faith and communion and invoke their intercession upon ourselves, the city of Rome, the Church, and the whole world. That was Pope Leo's homily. For today's Mass, we now have the blessing and imposition of the pallium. First, the Metropolitan Bishops will make a presentation. This will be some or all of the 54 of them who are receiving the pallium today. This should all be in Latin. So they will...
Dalla confessione dell'Apostolo Pietro i palli, collocati